Shutter Island. A masterpiece in tension, the music, and the dialogue just creates all this enormous attention, and we really get the feeling that something is not right. These was the first notes I wrote down while watching this movie, and because I didn't know the plot, I thought that this was the beauty with this movie. Luckily for me, I didn't know anything about it, so it was perfect, amazing. For the longest time, I heard that this movie was a masterpiece. From friends, YouTube videos, those TikToks saying top 10 videos, bro. So as I go through the first act, I think that this movie is definitely just about how well it creates the tension, how the music and the people just creates an awesome aura that have you on the edge of your seat, discovering this mystery. But was I wrong? Shutter Island is a 2010 American neo-noir psychological thriller directed by Martin Scorsese and adapted by later Calogridis. It's based on the 2003 novel of the same name, Shutter Island, by Dennis Lehane. What I want to do with this video is really just look at the different perspectives. In the first watch, you follow the protagonist, Teddy, and you have a whole different point of view. As if you watched it a second time, you know that Teddy might be the crazy one, so you see all these little clues and hints. So that's what I want to go through in this video. We follow U.S. Marshal Teddy, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his partner Chuck, played by Mark Ruffalo. They're on a job at a mental facility on an island far from the mainland. Already in the first scene, we see that Teddy is affected by the seasickness, and immediately as we land on the island, the mystique and the music sets the tension. From our point of view, the workers and the doctor appear very suspect, and they all have this mystique. Then meet Dr. John Corley. He appears really suspicious and he doesn't want to help the investigation. He doesn't really want to have anybody interviewed, and it just doesn't help a lot. Although this is a very frustrating situation, Teddy struggles to keep his temper in check, and this seems very out of character for a detective. We later know that he has some personal stake in this job, and we also hear about the man that killed his wife is actually a patient at this place. He also starts to get visions. These visions are of his wife, who was killed by Andrew Ladis in a fire, and memories of him conquering the Nazis and them killing all the German soldiers like a fire squad. The situation feels very wrong to him because they just lined them up like some fire squad and killed them all, almost like murder. They begin interviewing the patients, and the patients appear to hide something. Mr. Keen's write in his notebook, "Run." More on that later. Teddy and Chuck talks about his time in the war, and later Teddy reveals that he has been suspicious of the place. He tells Chuck about the cause of his suspicion. He had been doing a lot of research on Ashcliff, and he goes on about the questionable third-party funding and the experience they may be doing on the patient's minds. He also talks about a patient who was paid to do a psych study and went crazy. The patient ended up in Ashcliff, and when he comes out, he murders 3 men and begs not to be put in mental prison. Anyways, we proceed to get even more evidence. First, we find the fake and then the real Rachel Solando in a cave. This is very suspect. She tells him about the doctor and confirms that actually doing brain surgery stuff. She also tells him that the food, drink, and water has drugs in them. This also explains the visions she's been getting since arriving, and she tells him they're trying to remove people's emotions and use these people for war. Then we fast forward to when Teddy is being picked up by the warden, and this is where the so-called manipulations begin. Warden tells Teddy how violent he is, and he knows him very, very well. Everybody starts to say what part of when he asks where Chuck is. Teddy now realizes that they're trying to paint him as a crazy person. He meets the German doctor in the hallway and sees him with a syringe. He thinks it's for him and proceeds to assault the doctor and use the syringe on the doctor. And at this point is no point of return. And he proceeds to break into the lighthouse, which he previously thought was the brain surgery spot. But to his surprise, he finds nothing in all the rooms until the very last room, where Dr. John Corley sits at his desk. From here on, everything takes a turn. Dr. John Corley proceeds to explain that Teddy has been a patient at Ascliffe for the past 24 months, and this has been set up to make Teddy realize he's not actually a US Marshal anymore, and his wife was not killed by a crazy bald guy called Andrew Latis. The doctor tells him his visions and tremors are a result of withdrawal from a drug called chlorpromazine. How Edward Daniels and Andrew Latis are made up by the same Latis, and the same goes with Rachel Solando and his wife's name, Rachel Dolores. At this point, the truth becomes very, very blurry for both us and Teddy, and we are both in a state of confusion and denial. Dr. John Corley tells him that he has created false scenarios and stories in his mind because the truth hurts so much. The proof piles on, and for every question there is an explanation and proof of some sort. But he refuses to believe, and his quote-unquote partner reveals himself as the psychiatrist as he walks in the door. Andrew is given an ultimatum that he has to realize the truth now or he will be lobotomized. He pulls out his gun and screams that he can feel the weight of the bullets and starts to shoot. But nothing happens to the doctor, and Andrew Guns just breaks between his fingers while Chuck tells him it's just a toy. Chuck starts to talk about Dolores, that she was insane, manic depressive, and suicidal, and how Andrew tried to ignore all the signs because he loved her. They tell him how Andrew tried moving the family out to the lake after Dolores set their apartment on fire. The doctor shows him his children and tells him that his wife drowned them, just like the missing patient, Rachel Solando. Andrew goes into a vision, and we see a vision of his wife having drowned the kids in the lake. He runs to them in the lake, completely devastated. Andrew proceeds to lay the kids side by side, and Dolores comes to sit with him. She tells him they can just set them at the table and take them on picnics. As she keeps talking, he shoots her in the stomach, and just like that, he's lost more or less everything he loves. He wakes up in the bed, and the nurse is actually the fake Rachel from earlier. The doctor and Chuck makes him confirm his reality. In the end scene, Chuck comes around to see Edward. At first, he appears to be back to Teddy, but in the end, he says following.
You know, this place makes me wonder.
Yeah, what's that, boss?
Which would be worse? To live as a monster, or to die as a good man?
Showing that perhaps he does remember. And then we get some evil ass music. This is mostly the way I perceived the first watch. The reason for this is that Teddy is our point of view, and therefore we feel biased towards his perspective, and we see it from his perspective. When watching any movie or TV show, our main character is nearly always in the right in the end, and we often feel sympathy and choose sides with the protagonist. Point of view is a huge part of this film, and it really is what makes it so incredible. Coming to this island, seeing all the very serious guards, the doctor can't disclose any information, the strange missing of Rachel, the evil and intense music, and our always trusted protagonist that literally tells us he has proof. How can we not think this is a sketchy place? But what if we looked at the protagonist's actions with a different perspective, and the actions of Chuck maybe look more into how he and the doctor reacts to stuff? Now that we're not so sure who's in the right, we can watch it again, and maybe from the notion that Teddy might be the crazy guy, that we actually don't know. The first thing is the vision sensation. This makes quite a bit of sense when you hear about the chloro something medicine. Then in one of the visions early in the film, we see the vision from the burning apartment, and here we actually see blood coming out of Dolores' stomach. This is a hint at the truth and probably just something most missed. We also get hints that it's just all in his head. The woman they interview is seen drinking out of her hand, and in the next cut she's seen literally setting the glass down. So this might be a proof this is all in his head. Maybe, I'm not sure. One of my favorite clues though is Chuck having trouble taking off his gun holster. This is, at Teddy's point of view, this had us thinking that he might be a rookie or something. But of course he struggles because he's not a goddamn marshal. And I really have so much enjoyment going through the movie, looking and spying for clues. It's quite a rare experience in television. And another thing I wrote down is that the doctor is actually very, very quick to give Teddy pills. And with the Teddy perspective, I thought it's because he's a sus guy, you know. But with this perspective, is because he's a doctor and that's his patient. When Teddy returns to the cliff after looking at the lighthouse, he sees a smoke at the edge of the cliff. When he looks down, he sees what looks like Chuck laying on the cliff. But both the smoke and Chuck look very blurry and almost like bad CGI. This should be a major clue that is just going on in his head, but I still went on with it because I might just be an idiot. But when he comes down, he finds the cave with Rachel Solando. And this is where she tells him the story and just doubles down on his theory. And they make such a strong narrative. Although it's quite wild, but with the sketchy behavior and suspenseful and gloomy music and all the proof in Teddy's mind, it's quite believable. I find it so ironic for the characters that his narrative is that the mental facility makes up narratives to rewrite the truth and use it against people. Like what they said about, like what Rachel said about them using anything to convince people is crazy and nobody believes a crazy person. Or Teddy himself with his murdered wife and his war trauma. But the thing is, he does the exact same thing. Building narratives of brain surgery, third-party funding, and drug enough food to not believe him. Now I want to focus a bit more on Chuck. If you look at him in the movie, he's never actually the initiator, but always just standing around making sure everything's okay. Never will he go in front of Teddy, but always just hawking the situation. Just look at the scene where Teddy speaks to Dr. Giancarlo and the German doctor. When Teddy storms out the door, Chuck hesitates just a slight bit and gives the two doctors extremely subtle nod or look, just like everything's okay or something. You can't tell me that if someone was casted or a character meant to be an actual marshal and not an undercover psychiatrist, he would have carried himself in that manner he did in this movie or scene. In the first watch, you would probably just think he has more of a passive style, but in the second watch, it's pretty clear that he's just there to make sure Teddy is safe and is not doing anything too crazy. This leads us to the ending when Chuck returns to his undercover role. This scene sees Chuck test if Teddy has actually come to grips with reality, and it first appears he's back to his Teddy persona. Chuck seems clearly but quietly disappointed and shakes his head towards Dr. Giancarlo and the German doctor, signaling that the experiment has failed. But it's funny, if you watch this with no context, it's almost like he's shaking his head at him like they're the bad guys. But if you know the context, you know he's shaking his head because the experiment failed. One thing I find a bit funny is how Teddy thinks that he just by luck got the job. And in this exact moment, it's almost like he could have realized something is weird. But Chuck almost pulls him right back into it and saying they wanted him here and they're catching on to him. But one thing to me that's still a mystery is the patients. Were they in on it? Do they know? Are they like co-workers? But perhaps somebody has a theory or thoughts in the comments. The most fascinating part of this movie is probably the fact that it can, and for sure has been interpreted in two ways. Everyone who watches this video has probably realized by now that he's a patient, but it can totally be enjoyed thinking that he's there just messing with his brain. I feel like the point where you crack and start to believe the doctor says a little bit about your person. Perhaps a more logic-driven and statistic guy would believe Dr. Giancarlo sooner than a gullible person or a dream or something like that. But I don't know if it's just me tripping. I also find it pretty cool that you can watch the movie, get it all wrong, and still enjoy it and somewhat understand what's going on. It would make sense, because it would make sense they're trying to convince him he is insane, and it's just, the proof is in the pudding. Like, it's in all the small hints and clues, and if you don't notice them, perhaps you only watch it one time, I can't blame you, you know? The public opinion on the movie was fine, but nothing crazy. And I wonder if people didn't really understand it. Yeah, and a funny thing about it is that the reviews seem to gradually increase over the years. Many reviews from 2010 put it at a 3.5 out of 6 stars, or 5 stars. And some found the plot twist to be weird and probably didn't really understand it. And apparently it was also ruined quite a bit by online or offline discussions and people just talking. And maybe I heard something about a trailer ruining it a little bit, but today the movie has 8.2 rating on IMDb, so perhaps more people get it now. I don't know if it's just a theory I have. But most theories or most reviews these days seem to be quite positive, and I suppose those TikToks with top movies might help, even though I wonder how many people actually who watch TikTok every day actually watch many movies, because like it's so contradicting with the attention span. It's like 30 seconds or 2 hours. I don't know if people can handle the contrast, you know what I'm saying? But thank you for watching. Peace.